Well, welcome everybody. Little hint. So usually Sunday mornings when I come up, when this band is on, Steve Smith, don't leave just yet. Say, Steve, peek back out here. So when I come up on the stage and I say good morning to the band or whatever, Steve's usually the first one here from the band getting his stuff set up. And I usually say, good morning, Steve. And Steve, how do you usually address me when you say good morning back?
Pastor, Reverend, Doctor, Reverend, Pastor.
Very good. All right. Thank you very much, sir. All right. Just wanted to make sure that was clear. So, so it starts off every day with due respect from Steve Smith. So I'm Pete. Most of you just know me as Pete, which is the way I like it. But officially, I am, Trudy, you can bring up my stuff, I am the Reverend Dr. Peter Robert Shaw, D-Min, MDiv, BA, and a little BS thrown in, just for good measure, on occasion. So today I want to talk to you about some interesting things. First of all, when you were talking about who you are a fan of, some of the people, I'm guessing, how many were sports figures out there? Okay, a few sports figures. How many of you, I mean, just Bono, probably everybody it's Bono, right? Any other musicians, though, that you aspire to? Okay, politicians, anybody like that? Historical figures, perhaps? Parent, perhaps? Maybe? All right, very good. What am I missing here? What else?
Brothers and sisters.
Your brothers and sisters? All right, well, that's kind. All right, what else? Dar? You said Dar. Well, a good choice. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Way to go. I don't know if we're clapping for Dar Liz for that answer, but we're happy either way. All right. A lot of times when we think about titles and things like that, lots of different things come to mind about why we, our friends, about why we lift people up to certain esteem. So let's just think about that for a minute. Sometimes we do it, well, you help me out here. What do people identify themselves at when they tend to maybe lift themselves up? What do we think about in terms of our identity and our foundations? Let me give you an example. Somebody comes to you at a party and they say, hi, your name is Lauren. Lauren, what do you do? So Lauren gives his answer. Well, right now he's all kinds of things, but our identity is sometimes focused in our work or our business or our title. Sometimes our identity, our sense of worth is in education. Sometimes our sense of identity and who we are, our worth, our value of ourself is based on how much money we have in our portfolio. What else is out there? How do people identify themselves? Anything come to mind? So-and-so's mom, right. So, or I'm the parent of, right. Yeah, which is a lot of fun if you're a parent and your kid's not screwing up too bad. That was a kick for me, actually, because where we live, nobody gives a rip. Most of them didn't know much that I was a pastor, so I was just knowing Lakin's dad, which was wonderful. And I just love that. Okay, what else? What do people, how do you identify yourself? Your titles, whatever, yeah.
Volunteer activities.
Okay. Excellent, right. Yeah, right. And take some pride in that. Sometimes it's hobbies that's related to that. Yeah. Uh-huh. How many of you are men? How many of you are women? Excellent. Sometimes we identify ourselves by our gender. So our identity, who we are, is heavily shaped by I'm man or I'm woman or whatever. For some of you, it's your race. And actually, for everybody, it's your race. You just may not know it. For some of us, it can be some dark things that happen in our lives. Maybe you were victimized at some point as a kid, and you've never let that go. You need to integrate it. You're trying to work it through, but sometimes you run into folks that hold on to that so much that it is like the leading identifier of their lives. So I'm abused kid, or I'm whatever. And their whole life they move forward with this as their primary identifier. I don't know if you ever heard that. Sometimes it's what we're addicted to. So hi, I'm Pete, I'm a recovering whatever. And that's our identity going forward. And these titles can be healthy and unhealthy, can't they? Depending on how far we go with each of them. So let me ask you an interesting question here. What do Benjamin Franklin, musician-songwriter Ed Sheeran, and late-night TV show host Stephen Colbert have in common? They all hold doctorate degrees. Did you know that? 23-year-old Ed Sheeran, Benjamin Franklin, and Stephen Colbert all hold doctorate degrees. You know what else is interesting about that? Not one of them earned it the old-fashioned way. They all received their doctorate degrees as honorary doctorate degrees. All this is going to make sense in a few minutes, but just ride with me for a moment, because there's a couple ways you can get a doctorate degree. You can do it the old-fashioned way, which is a lot of hard work and study and lots of classwork, a crazy amount of research, write a thesis paper, defend your thesis paper, get it stamped, and graduation. That's the old-fashioned way. Or you could get an honorary doctorate, and sometimes those honorary doctorates are truly a great honor because the institution that's giving it to the person, perhaps they looked at their career and they said, wow, that person has done some extraordinary things. And one of the greatest ways we can shed honor on that person is to give them this honorary doctorate. Even if the college doesn't even award master level degrees, they can still award an honorary doctorate. It's very interesting. And it's a way of showing great honor to the person who's receiving it. Sometimes people receive honorary doctorates from universities for one simple reason. They want that person to come and give a commencement address. And so you may be familiar with our former governor, Dr. who? Dr. Schwarzenegger, right? Truly. I think he's received several honorary doctorates. And so the debate is, once you have an honorary doctorate, is it appropriate for you to use the title doctor in front of your name in different settings? And there actually is a debate going on. And you would guess that people from the academic side of things aren't real thrilled about that title being used by people who got an honorary doctorate. And those who got an honorary doctorate are pretty okay with using it to varying degrees wherever it might work. It's an interesting debate, and it raises the question, well, why would anybody want to use it in the first place if they didn't earn it in the old-fashioned way? But there are some people that you revere that do. One of those is Dr. Ben Franklin, who liked to be called Dr. Franklin. Another one that most of evangelical Christianity for sure admires is Dr. Billy Graham. Isn't that interesting? So that's my first title, is Doctor, or Reverend Doctor. So let's talk about the Rev, because the Rev is also related, and again, just bear with me, I'm not just ranting here about different things, but this all will make sense if you just hang on with me. And I'm really talking about titles and why we use them in the first place. What are we doing with them? So you can get a Rev in a range of ways. One way you can get a Rev is the old-fashioned way. And if you want to be ordained, that's what Reverend represents, and a particular breadth of denominations, of which ours is a part, particularly mainline or larger denominations. You got to get a master's degree, which first generally requires a master's degree, and it's a long master's degree. It's over 100 hours, so you're going to spend 3 years solid to get that master's degree. It's long. And then you got to go through, after you've written all those papers, then you have to write another paper for an ordination committee from your denominational tribe. Have them grill your paper, grill you personally. Then you have to go before your peers. And in my case, it was about 150 pastors from around Michigan who wanted to come. Some had a chip on their shoulder against my dad, who is the executive minister in Michigan, and just wanted to get at him by grilling me. And they did. So my experience was over 2 hours of just being grilled on my theology. And it's my oral defense. Well, after you pass all that, then they give you their stamp of approval, and what that means is once the denomination gives you that ordination, it's kind of like passing the bar. You're able to take that all over the place, and it's going to be recognized pretty much everywhere, which mine is. However, there's another way you can get a Rev in front of your name, and that is, let's say you're a country preacher. This happens pretty common in Southern Baptist churches or independent churches. And you're in the middle of nowhere. It's really unlikely that you're going to get the education and go through the process. It's just not feasible. It's not practical and all that. And so the local church is actually the ordaining body, and the local church that you're in, wherever you might be, it's not just rural, it happens in urban settings too for the same kind of reasons, they can confer the title on generally their pastor to say, you are now ordained. And it counts, and it's legit, and it means what it means as long as that person's at that church. But it doesn't carry necessarily from church to church. It's because that church did it. And then you have one other way of getting your ordination, and that's the mouse click ordination. And that's where you simply Google search ordination, and there will be several options for you, all free of charge, that the only thing you have to do is click the button, and you are a Rev. That means that you can marry your friends and relatives and bypass going down to the courthouse. That's why people do that for the most part. So that Rev title means different things depending on what the backstory is and what it's about. Some people who are the mouse click Revs, I would have a real hard time with if they equated their Rev with my Rev, because theirs just took a mouse click. And even though I think God looks at everybody equally, there's something a little weird about that. So let me bring up another example of the same kind of thing that we're talking about. You may not be familiar with the name, but you will be in 3 minutes. Kyle Barwin is this guy's name. Now, Kyle Barwin was arrested because his girlfriend called the cops on him. Kyle Barwin met this woman and won her heart as he was in uniform. He served in the military, as he explained to her, and did a tour over in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they became close. He moved in with her, and slowly and surely he began to steal from her. And he would continue to tell stories of his military service, the heroism, the risk, all of this. And he continued to tell stories and continue to tell stories. And after a while, his girlfriend started to wonder if all of these stories could actually be true. And more she realized, I don't think they are. And so she did a little research and called the police, because she was pretty sure that the guy that was sharing her home was a fraud. And in fact, he was. He never served a day in the military. This is called stolen valor. Are you familiar with it? It's people who go to the whatever shop and get a uniform and walk around. And why do they do it? Why do they walk around posing as somebody who serves or served in the military? What's your guess? You get treated with great respect, right? Because we live in a military area, sometimes people, especially if I'm checking out at a store, they'll ask me if I've served in the military because of my haircut. And I say, no, but is there a military haircut discount? And that hasn't worked yet, but I'm still trying. Stolen valor. I mean, we look at that and we're like, wow, are you kidding me? If you do a search on YouTube for that, you will see probably hundreds of videos of people who have served calling out those who haven't served. And they know exactly what to look for, and they just start asking guys questions and then find out pretty quick this person's a fraud. Now, some people, I know one in particular that has some mental issues, and getting mad at that guy, well, what's the point, But some other folks, it kind of speaks to a strange thing. It's like wanting to get propped up, wanting to get all the credit, wanting to get all of the glory, wanting to be respected and revered without having to do the actual thing to earn it. It's an odd thing. And it's odd because you wonder, why do they keep it up? Because they have to somewhere know that their story is just not quite good enough to pass muster with somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. And so they walk around, the doctors, the Revs, the military service, just kind of trying to hope that people don't ask enough questions to find out that they're frauds. Well, this actually is very important for the text we're going to look at today, because that was an issue, as you'll see in the text. But let me give you some backstory about Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. Now, there's academic debate about when Matthew is written. I think I'm in favor of a later writing of Matthew, which means that Matthew came to its final form, written onto its final scroll after 70 AD. And there's a few reasons why I think that's obvious in the text. It doesn't mean that everything in there didn't happen. I mean, it's 35 years or more after Jesus' life. But there are some cues and clues within Matthew's gospel that would make the case for that. And one of those has to do with the object of Jesus' challenge or accountability today. Because you're going to see him talking about the Pharisees. And he's going to speak about the Pharisees as being the rulers in charge of Judaism. And he's going to describe them in chapter 23 that clearly describe the leadership of all things Judaism in Jerusalem that would have been present in Jesus' day. But here's an interesting thing that happened. When Jesus was alive and doing his thing in Jerusalem, the leadership of Judaism were not the Pharisees. Think political parties, if you will. That's kind of a broad stroke. But you had the Pharisees and the other primary group, which actually was in charge. They were called the Sadducees. They had different theological leanings, but the Sadducees were in charge. And so when you see Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew taking issue with the people who are in charge, and they're referred to as Pharisees, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense, because they weren't in charge. The Sadducees were in charge. So you kind of have to bend your mind a little bit here and realize you got a couple different things happening within Matthew's gospel. One, it's written after 70 AD, and nobody after 70 AD, which is when Jerusalem was sacked, the temple was completely destroyed, and the Sadducee party entirely was wiped out. You hear no mention of that party at all after 70 AD. So that means that people after 70 AD who are coming to know what this Jesus thing is and reading this scroll of Matthew, that's the good news of Jesus, the biography of Jesus, if you will, they're going to read about, if they were to read Sadducees, they'd be like, I don't even know what that is. And so they put the name of the current leaders in there, the Pharisees, because they were running the show after 70 AD. You following me? Then you got two other issues. You got an issue of Jesus and who and what was going on. So you're going to see Jesus taking issue with really the Sadducees. And the things that you're seeing were definitely things that Jesus took issue with them about. But then you also have to recognize that you had a different audience reading this 35 years and much later who are seeing Pharisees and also struggling with the same kinds of things. Because the leadership within Judaism at that time were not happy at all with this new group called the Jesus followers, the people of the way. They looked at them as this growing sect within Judaism, which they were. And what do we do with them? They did not like them, they didn't want them around, and they were hostile toward them. So it was not a conducive environment after 70 AD. And by the end of the first century, you hardly saw any more Jewish people within the Christian community. It was all non-Jewish people or Gentile people. So those are the dynamics that are taking place here. And you have to know, if you remember, that Jesus was brought up on charges by the Sadducees, the leaders of Judaism. It wasn't all of Jews who were taking issue with Jesus. It was a few leaders who had their power pushed by Jesus, who were threatened. They knew their titles were vulnerable. They had plenty of letters after their name. And they knew their ship was coming down if they didn't deal with Jesus. The Pharisees, in contrast, for the most part, didn't have any letters after their name. There was no D-Min. There was no M-Div for most of the Pharisees. There are a few scholars that were Pharisees that did. This is important because of this. Most of the people who were called rabbi, who were with the Pharisee tradition, didn't go to school for it. It was a title of honor because rabbi means honored teacher, highly honored teacher. And so if you were serving up near the Sea of Galilee and you'd been there for some time and you were looked at as the leader over time, they're going to look at you and say, and call you, give you the designation rabbi. There's great historical evidence for this within Jewish tradition itself. There was one guy named Ben-Honi. Ben-Honi was known for his powerful prayers. But everybody just knew him as Ben-Honi. Then they knew him as Ben-Honi the circle maker, because that was part of the way that he did prayers. And after he died, they gave him the title Rabbi Ben-Honi. as a matter of honor. So the Pharisees who we're looking at after 70 AD did not earn their degrees or their titles in the old-fashioned way. But they loved their titles nonetheless. So you've got Jesus' actual camp with the Sadducees who earn their titles but put all their eggs in that basket. And then you have the Pharisees 3 decades and more later who were enjoying the titles that they did not earn and still putting their eggs in that basket and flaunting it around. That's the context that we run into. So let's see what Jesus had to say to them. On the next slide. Now Jesus turned to address his disciples along with the crowd that had gathered with them. The religion scholars and Pharisees, those would be the scribes, they're sort of like Jewish law lawyers. The religion scholars and Pharisees are competent teachers in God's law. So Jesus is not ripping on what they're instructing. He says, you won't go wrong in following their teachings on Moses, but be careful about following them. They talk a good line, but they don't live it. They don't take it into their hearts and live it out in their behavior. It's all about spit and polish veneer. Instead of giving you God's law as food and drink by which you can banquet on God, they package it in bundles of rules, loading you down like pack animals. They actually had phylacteries that they would wear around their arm and their forehead, little boxes that they would stuff scriptures into. That's kind of what they're talking about here. Now, they seem to take pleasure in watching you stagger under these loads and wouldn't think of lifting a finger to help. Now remember, the disciples, when they hear this, they're going to remember Jesus saying at one time, you know, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. In contrast to the Pharisees who are loading them up with all this legalism that they're struggling under. So we continue. Their lives are perpetual fashion shows, embroidered prayer shawls one day and flowery prayers the next. They love to sit at the head table at church dinners, basking in the most prominent positions, preening in the radiance of public flattery, receiving honorary degrees, aha, here it is, and getting called doctor and reverend. In other words, they love being known by their title. That's where their power is. That's where their identity is. And guess what happens if you try to mess with it? They're going to mess with you right back with everything they've got to bring to the table. Jesus continues, don't let people do that to you. Put you on a pedestal like that. You all have a single teacher and you are all classmates. Don't set people up as experts over your life, letting them tell you what to do. Save that authority for God. Let Him tell you what to do. No one else should carry the title of father. This isn't a slam on Catholicism, by the way, if you came up in that tradition. But it is talking about putting that title falsely in terms of not listening to God directly. No one should carry the title of father. You have only one Father, and He's in heaven. And don't let people maneuver you into taking charge of them. There is only one life leader for you and them, Christ. Do you want to stand out? Then step down. Be a servant. If you puff yourself up, you'll get the wind knocked out of you. But if you're content to simply be yourself, your life will count for plenty. Let's back up one, Trudy. There's another way that last thing reads. Jesus says this, whoever would be great among you, he must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you, he must be slave of all. That's the framework that Jesus had in terms of what true success looks like. And it's in sharp contrast to what was being shown by the religious leaders of that day. The religious leaders that day were banking on their legalism, on their prowess, on their knowledge, and on their title, the power that was given to them by Rome for the Sadducees, and more by the community, still a little bit by Rome, but very different by the Jewish people after 70 AD. They knew that they were in charge, they knew that they had the authority, and they did not want that to be challenged. They wanted to have the authority to do that. And if you were to challenge that or poke holes in it or question them, you were in for a fight, as Jesus was repeatedly. Don't mess with their theology, don't mess with their belief, because they're the ones who know what's right, and you don't. But I don't know about you, but if you ever come on to somebody who is really basing their identity and basing who they are on their title alone, it doesn't take very long to realize that they're very vulnerable. Because it doesn't take much to take that title away. especially in our day and age, one Facebook post can wipe that title right out. One Yelp review, and your business that you're so proud of can be done. That's how the world works today. And it more than ever begs the question, what are you building your strength on? What is your foundation? The Pharisees that Jesus is taking issue with, Sadducees and Pharisees that are being taken issue with, they're putting their eggs in the wrong basket. They're putting it in their achievements, and their titles, their pedigree, their heritage. And Jesus is saying, as soon as you do that, as soon as you try to protect that too much, when that becomes number one, you're actually weaker, not stronger. This doesn't mean that we're not proud of our achievements. I'm proud that I earned the degrees that I did. I'm proud that I went through the ordination thing. I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of my name. You don't know this because most of you didn't grow up in our denominational tradition. But my last name carries a lot of weight in the denomination because my father and my grandfathers were big deals in the denomination. So in denominational circles, when they hear my name or see my name, they immediately know my pedigree. And for a long time, I'm proud of it, but for a long time I think I put a little more into my family name than I think was probably appropriate. Not because of anything about my family, but because of my identity. When I was in high school, I played a little bit of sports, but what I became better known for was theater and music. And so I put a lot of eggs into my musicianship basket. Felt pretty proud of that. And you all know I'm an amazing dancer. Well, no pride in that, except for to make fun of myself. And I think as a maturation thing, the human experience is to figure out how do we define and differentiate ourselves and what do we feel good about. And there are so many good things to feel good about and so many things to differentiate ourselves about. So it's not to say that we're not going to have pride or a sense of pride or heritage or anything on all these things, be it our achievements, be it our family name, be it our race, be it our culture, our flag, all these things. But Jesus is raising the question, what is the most important thing? And as he's asking that question, he's really saying, using the leadership as the example, when you put all your eggs in that basket and all of those other things, you think you're strong by virtue of all those things, but actually, if those are what you're building everything on, you're more vulnerable than you can possibly imagine, because it can all go away. So on the next slide, Brene Brown is a highly revered academic, I think out of Houston, and does a lot with social science research. And in her study of the concept of vulnerability, what she learned was this, is that when we mask our vulnerability, we actually come off weak. Have you ever really run into somebody who is just all about their title, all about their position? And the longer you're around them, you realize there's not much there. I'm talking really exaggerated caricatures, but they exist in our culture. And you're looking at one at times, perhaps. When we do that, when we allow that to be our thing, the only people that we're really fooling is ourselves. That's why, for the most part, unless I'm in a crowd that needs to know where I'm coming from or needs to know the pedigree, most people, like in the evacuation, when they wanted to know what to call me, I was like, well, Pete will do just fine. Because I know enough about myself to know that as soon as we prop ourselves up, it takes one swing of the bat for the legs to come out. And it all falls apart. Brene Brown's research, the data, suggests that the more we try to protect our vulnerability, to keep our defenses high, the more weak we become. the more we put into our name, the more we put into our pedigree, the more we put into our title, thinking that that is an appearance of strength, the weaker we become. And she says that we mask our vulnerability in a range of ways. And because I believe that this is a human experience, that we all prop ourselves up to give ourselves a strong identity and strong self-esteem, my question for you is, how do you do some of these things? So one of the ways that she says is sometimes we numb ourselves to the pain of our life. We don't want to embrace our weakness. We don't even want to recognize our vulnerability, so we numb ourselves to it in different ways. And she said as a result, we are the most overweight, over-medicated, overspent culture in American history. All acts of numbing ourselves to the pain of our vulnerability. How do you numb yourself to that? Sometimes we mask our vulnerability by giving ourselves over to perfectionism. So I have to have it exactly right all the time. I have to keep up the image of being just exactly right. For some of us, it's certitude. So definitely the Pharisees were well renowned for this. They had the correct theology. Theirs was right. Their fundamental view, their particular fundamental view of their religious tradition was the correct one. And if you were challenging that, you were obviously wrong. And so we do that with certitude. We're absolutely certain about what we have. The problem is everybody around us can see 1,000 holes in our thinking and recognize it's not quite as solid as we thought it was. And sometimes we actually mask our vulnerability with cynicism. This is an interesting finding that she came up with. That in criticizing everything around us, we deflect attention from ourselves. It's sort of like this. It's sort of like when we see something wrong with culture, it's just taking a pot shot at that to raise doubt and to raise questions about the very capacity to research anything at all. You know what I'm saying? So somebody, somewhere along the line, said that cigarette smoking is a bad idea, that it's bad for your health. Can you believe it? And yet I know some people who smoked and went well into their 90s. We can't trust the medical professionals about smoking because I know that guy who lived to 95 and smoked. That's what I'm talking about. When you're cynical of the one thing, it takes away the credibility of research itself, so that when the microscope is pushed in your direction, you can easily push it away. Because how can you trust the source? That showed up in her research on the study of vulnerability. But you know what she discovered? She said that the people who actually embraced their vulnerability actually found themselves to be genuinely stronger. And when they recognize that, yeah, okay, I'm human, and I'm not perfect, and BS are the last two letters at the end of my name, that we're all full of a little something, that when that is really the case for who we all are, it changes us. Because we no longer have a need to be propped up. And you know what happens when we no longer have a need to be propped up? It means we see ourselves in a different kind of a way. And we see others in a different kind of a way. She even said this, that the people who embrace vulnerability did so because they recognize that what makes us vulnerable is what makes us beautiful. And that is absolutely true, most true in the Christian tradition. Because we recognize that we don't have it all together, but the Spirit of God comes along anyway and takes even our ugliest parts of ourselves and even our pride, everything about us, and weaves it into our narrative, weaves it into our story, and becomes a beautiful reflection of what's happening in us, not the distraction. What is vulnerable in us is what makes us beautiful. When we choose to be propped up on our title, on whatever it is that we prop ourselves up with, it means that everybody who doesn't match up to ourselves aren't quite as good as us. And so long as everybody is just not quite as good as us, we can treat them accordingly. But when we choose to embrace our vulnerability and recognize we're as broken as the next person, we're as imperfect as the next person, It changes our perspective on every person. So I can no longer look at them as, oh, well, that's just a woman. No, that's a person just like me. Oh, well, that's just a Mexican. No, that's a person just like me. Oh, that's just another ISIS, Islam person. No, that's just a person just like me. Everybody is equalized when we choose to do what Jesus said, by choosing to serve the other. That's where real valor comes from, isn't it? When we think about the great heroes of life and history, the ones who raised to the top are not just the ones that made the most money, who had the greatest military conquest, but the ones that you think of when you think of character and nobility. They are the Mother Teresas. They are the Billy Grahams. They are the Martin Luther King Jr.'s. And a myriad of others who chose to serve instead of be served. I don't know how this is messing with you today. I know that for me, my life struggle, a part of being human, is working this whole thing out. About how do we choose to be human? And how do we balance pride, the tension of feeling wonderful about the good things in our lives, and yet also realizing at the same time we're still human. And I wonder how you enter into that. I wonder what pieces of you you need Jesus speaking into to whisper into your ear. I know you feel awesome about that, but man, don't lose sight of perspective. Your name's awesome, but your name isn't really you. You are made in the reflection of God. You are made in the image of God. Build your life on that, because that will never shake. And as you view everybody else, look at the same. Maybe yours is your title. Maybe yours is your age. Maybe it is your fitness level. Maybe it's how many pizzas you can eat in one sitting. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, the question before you is, what are you building your life on? And Jesus is saying to this group of leaders, there's one foundation that's not going to shake. And it's going to manifest itself in serving others as a servant and as a slave. That is what leads to life. This coming from the guy who had the market on titles in every possible way. And who knows? Maybe if you follow this Jesus that closely and actually pay attention to what he says, maybe someday a university somewhere will give you that title of doctor. Your church will give you a title of reverend. And you'll be receiving the valor not because of a uniform you kind of ripped off from somebody else, but because you've actually served, and served well. Let's pray together. Well, God, I don't know what you want to do with this exactly. When Jesus was saying this stuff to these leaders, he was trying to hold a mirror to their face. And he did it with a lot of passion because their pompousness had caused a lot of pain and suffering for themselves and lots of other people. And so perhaps we need that today. Perhaps we just need to be reminded of what really matters. And I pray that somehow, even through me, you're able to deliver that. That this is a human condition issue of propping ourselves up, to protect ourselves perhaps, maybe to lord it over others, to feel a little better than, I don't know. But you are giving us a contrast, a different way to go. And so, Crosswalk, I invite you to take a moment just to reflect. If Jesus were saying these things to you right now, how would you respond? What would he identify in you as false identities, as less than reasons to build your life? And what do those things represent, those titles you've given yourself? Have they taken the place of your identity as a child of God? And then maybe Crosswalk today is a new day for a different start, for a new chapter. Time to re-up your identity. Not in all the wonderful things, but in your identity as a creature, a person made in the image of God. We choose that. So God, may we be known not by our ability to be pompous, or our ability to impress others with our titles and the letters after our name, but may we win a world because we've chosen to serve, because we know our identity is in you. We have nothing to lose. There is nothing to lose because it cannot be lost, because we are now and forever completely yours. May that shape our eyes. May it form our steps, that we would be more like Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen. We have one last song to go through. And as we sing this, if you have any prayer concerns, we didn't do a bulletin this week or a crosswalk guide. We just wanted to see what you thought if we didn't do one, honestly. It's an experiment. So if you really missed the crosswalk guide, if that was a big part of your experience here, let us know that. If you have prayer concerns, use the info card on that. Let us know if you're coming to Thanksgiving dinner next Sunday. And any offering you have, we absolutely need that as well. So thank you for being here, and we hope to see you next week.